So welcome everyone to our Friday weekly discovery session. For those that have been following this series from the beginning, you will immediately recognize that I'm not Natalie Irwin. I am a poor substitute for Natalie, but I offered to pinch hit today for her. So my name's Corey Diamond. I'm the Executive Director of Efficiency Canada. So welcome to today's session. The last session of spring. It's officially summer on the weekend, unless you're joining us from the Southern Hemisphere, which sometimes people do join us from the Southern Hemisphere. You're heading into winter on the weekend, so sorry about that. So just a reminder of the format of the session. We'll have about a 20-minute presentation from our guest speaker today, and then we open it up the floor to questions. And a bit of discussion for another 20 minutes. And then we really try to wrap up right at 12:45 Eastern as a hard stop to just respect everyone's schedules. So yeah, let's get started. So yeah, my pleasure right now to introduce our speaker today. It's Alex Corneglio. He's the CTO and the co-founder of EnergyX Solutions. Alex is in Toronto today, and he's going to be discussing something that's been on the mind of a lot of people. Certainly, we're hearing a lot of this discussion around virtual energy audits. And Alex is going to walk us through what his team has learned, from digging into how data science can solve this modern challenge that we're all facing. And just before we jumped and opened up the broadcast, Alex and I were talking about this whole notion of adaptation and how all of us are going to have to adapt to different ways of doing things. And I think virtual energy audits are one of those things where we're hearing a lot of people adapting right now. So welcome, Alex. I'll pass it over to you. Your screen is being shared. I will go on mute and take it away.
Great. Thank you very much, Corey. I'm really happy to be here in my house talking with all of you. I think, as Corey mentioned, it is a really timely topic, but I think it's one that's also going to transcend this time. So with that in mind, indeed, let's get started. The topic today is virtual audits. Are they the new normal? And then sort of the subtitle here that we're going to end up spending most of the time on this afternoon is why data science is opening new doors in the energy efficiency industry. And to kick it off then, I think what I want to do is tackle that first question right away. Will virtual audits be the new normal? And I think that we can answer this pretty quickly. I think that we can answer it heuristically. And I'm going to try to do that with the next slide. So bear with me while I walk you through this. The top image, you got a couple of images sort of striated across the screen. The top image is an Amazon fulfillment center. Now, Amazon has been virtually auditing all of its customers for decades now. What they're trying to do is predict what those customers are going to buy next. And when they make a prediction, they actually start pre-shipping those items to nearby distribution centers. So Amazon, pioneer in data science, they've been virtually auditing customers since the mid-2000s. The middle image is the Kepler-90 solar system. So Google and NASA found this solar system in 2017 while they were using AI to virtually audit the galaxy, if you can believe that. It turns out that finding Kepler-90 was like finding a needle in the haystack. It happens to be a solar system about 2,000 light years away. It is very, very similar to our own solar system. So it's a huge finding, and it wouldn't have been done using human astronomers alone. The bottom image is a credit card. So every time you make a transaction with your card, every time you make a digital transaction, even if you're not using that card directly, it is being virtually audited for fraud prevention. In 2019, Forbes actually reported that fraud prevention and risk management has become the #1 use of data science and AI in the financial industry. It's now beating out customer service, chatbots, and all that good stuff. So with this in mind, let's ask the question again. Will virtual audits be the new normal? Absolutely. And it's way beyond COVID. This is going to be the new normal in 6 months. It's going to be the new normal in 6 years. And I feel confident saying that because it's the new normal, or it is normal, in almost every other industry. We've got 3 examples here today. So like I said, for the rest of the time, if you'll permit me, I'm going to focus on the second question, the question of how data science is actually doing. How is it opening doors in energy efficiency specifically? And we're going to look at this through the lens of virtual audits. First, I'll say a few more words about myself, just full disclosure. So I am the CTO and co-founder of EnergyX Solutions. We are a software company. We are developing virtual audits. For about the last 6 years, I've been exclusively focused on building database solutions for energy efficiency programs and customers. And my contact information is there. So if you like what I'm talking about, or if at the end of this presentation you decide you hate it, feel free to send me an email and let's continue the conversation. And with that in mind, for about the next 15 minutes or so, we're going to be focusing on the following things. The first thing that I want to do is sort of work with you to put together a working definition of a virtual energy audit. There's a lot of talk these days about what these things could be and why they're useful. And I think that it's important that we define it here. For the purposes of this conversation and moving forward, let's talk about what a virtual audit can be. And let's also try to talk about what does a virtual audit need to do to be useful. Secondly, we're going to get into the weeds a little bit. We're going to talk about how EnergyX built ours and hopefully give you an idea about how you can maybe build your own. And along the way, we're going to talk about the key learnings that we uncovered as we did that. And I think that there's good insights there for everybody, whether or not you actually intend to use or build virtual audits yourself. In a nutshell, what I'll say is that with our virtual audit, what we do is we collect and process building data. And we use that building data to predict a building's energy consumption, basically the energetic performance of the building. We can do that at the measured level. And here's the spoiler alert, we can do it with an accuracy which is basically equivalent to what's happening with on-site audits today. So it's really exciting technology that we're going to walk through. And the third point, we're going to start to scratch the surface on how you might use this. So we're going to define it. We're going to talk about how you can build one and what they can do. And then we're going to look at some of the potential use cases. And this is based on things that we're doing across Canada and across North America. And it's also based on conversations that we've had with industry stakeholders. So we're going to open that up so that you can see what was the future going to look like. So let's jump into it. What is a virtual audit? I wanted to define virtual audits. I wanted to do it right away. And I decided I would try to define a virtual audit the way that I thought a virtual audit might do it. So I looked for basic data about the words virtual and audit. I found the definitions at the bottom of the screen on Google. And then what I did is I synthesized them together and I tried to develop our own definition. So the audit part is pretty easy. That's a systematic assessment of a building's energy performance and improvement potential. People don't usually have a problem with that part. We've been doing audits for decades. They're great. We understand what they are. The challenging part, the controversial part, the troublesome part is the virtual part. We want to do an audit with software alone, ideally. And we want to run that software on the basis of available data that we've collected without visiting the building site, right? That's the virtual component. And like I said, it is controversial. There's a lot of people that say you can't do this. It's not going to work. And so I think before we go further, it's important to ask ourselves, well, why then? Why is it necessary to do this virtually? Why can't we continue doing it the way we've been doing it? The reason is, well, social distancing. That's one reason, right? Social distancing kind of puts a wrench in the on-site audit operational procedure. But there's better reasons, I would say. Virtual means lowering the cost. It means, eliminating experts, lots of experts that have to spend a lot of time. It means eliminating truck rolls, getting these experts to specific locations. The lowered costs turn into greater scalability. A virtual audit should be able to get better as it goes. You should be able to improve the results for customers, and you should be able to improve the delivery mechanism over time. That's what I mean by scalability. And that's something that, virtual really does embody. If you think about machine learning, that is, this idea of constant improvement. And as you do more, as you start to predict more things, you can actually predict the next thing even better. So scalability is important. Scalability is important because that means more audits. More audits is important because that means more efficiency. And we do need more efficiency, and I think we do need more audits. So today, on-site audits reach about 1% of the population every year on a good year, but that's a good heuristic number to work with. Online audits, less accurate, but much more scalable. If they're available, if they're properly marketed, you could try to get another 5 to 15% of the population to self-audit, to audit themselves. But that means that ideally, you've still got 84% of the population basically untapped. And I think that that's why virtual is important, right? Virtual is a way to go after that 84% of the population that's not getting an audit, that's not adopting energy efficiency. So we wanted to sort of consolidate this into a use case. We talked about what a virtual audit is, what makes it useful, what does a virtual audit have to do to be able to be valuable in a landscape where there's already other options that you can choose from. We talked about how on-site audits, they do accuracy really well. They give us a really good picture of the standard operating conditions of that building and how it can perform energetically, but they suffer on the cost side. The costs are high, scalability is low, each audit is basically just another audit. And because of the human components, there are sometimes issues with consistency, at least compared to an algorithmic process for doing an audit. Remote audits, they've come onto the scene lately. You've got your expert like me, he's sitting at home, and then he's interacting with the building virtually. He's on a video chat with the building occupant, and they're trying to figure out information together. This works today because it's the only way that you can do an audit. If you want to do an on-site type audit, you can't be on site. Remote helps you there. But it doesn't really reduce the cost. It just reduces the truck roll. And it places a lot of additional burden on the occupant now. Now the occupant has to help the auditor to figure out this information that the auditor needs to do their analysis. And because things can get lost in translation, the accuracy starts to suffer. And that's the big reason, I think, why on-site audits are so important, because they do provide that accuracy into how the building can perform. Online audits, we talked about this as well, super scalable, very cost effective, but they're self-serve mechanism, right? So customers can enter whatever information they want, and that means that there's a lot of variability when it comes to the accuracy. So now we know what a virtual audit can be, right? It's an audit, we're doing it remotely, we're doing it with information that we don't need to collect on site. It's going to be something that's cost effective, it's going to be scalable, and if it's going to be valuable, it has to be as accurate as an on-site audit. How do we build one of these things? Let's dig in. So here's a basic roadmap for developing a virtual audit. This is essentially what we did at EnergyX. Sure, it's simplified, but sometimes simple is good. The first thing that you want to do is leverage your available data resources. You're going to want to do this for one main reason, and that's because you're going to be looking at this data and you're going to be using this data to try and predict some sort of a target. In our case, the target that we wanted to predict was energy consumption and measure level savings for residents. So we built this virtual audit specifically for homes. And our virtual audit happens to use building data to do that. And we'll talk about why we did it that way in some of the subsequent. The next thing you want to do, once you've got your initial data set that you're going to start to use to conduct these virtual audits, you want to ensure that there's actually correlations between the data that you have and the target that you want to predict. Basically, what we need to do is figure out what features of a building are strongly correlated with the energy performance. What features of a building can we look at and use to predict how that building is going to perform, and what's going to happen as we start to deploy retrofit into the building. The next piece is you want to hone accuracy. So this is the really important part, right? We mentioned earlier that the virtual audit, if it's going to be effective, it has to be accurate. And so this is where you build your model. And your model essentially is like a function. It's like a machine that transforms your inputs, those highly correlated inputs, into that target output. How do we take the building features and actually turn them into predicted consumption? And as you start to do that, there's a lot of training involved. You have to train your model to be able to do this. And your model learns how to do this by being exposed to more and more combinations of information, inputs and outputs. Slowly it learns, okay, when I see this, it means that the building is likely to perform like that. And once you've got that, you just keep doing it. You keep testing and iterating and trying to improve the model, improve it in certain areas, improve accuracy in certain ways, deploy it in different populations. It's a very iterative process, data science. The other thing that's on this slide here is basically how many records, what volume of records were we working with at each of these steps. So a lot of people think that you need, millions of data points if you're going to do data science. A lot helps. More data is almost always better. When we started, we were leveraging data sets that were, hundreds of thousands of records. Today, when we're doing some of the fine tuning of the model, sometimes we're only using 100 records, a couple hundred records. So really the data that you need and the amount of data you need available, it depends on the problem that you're trying to solve. So that shouldn't necessarily be a hurdle if you're just starting out on this journey. With that in mind, let's dig into some of the more details. I want to pull out here from this process, what did we learn in hopes that that will benefit you, that you'll learn something as well, that gives you some interesting insights. And the first question will be with regards to leveraging available data. Why? Why did we choose building data? Well, EnergyX started out as an online audit provider. So because of this, we had a great opportunity to look at hundreds of thousands of online audits. And when we did that, we started noticing really interesting trends. The conventional wisdom basically says that the more energy you use, the more you can save. And that's true. Turns out that's true, at least according to the data we looked at, within the general population. And on this chart, you can see that as the green line. So the y-axis is annual savings potential in dollars, and this is your average monthly bill. And so you see that as the bill goes up, so does the savings potential. That's the green line. What's interesting here is that people who enroll in utility programs, people that participate in programs, they follow a different trend. These customers have disproportionately high savings, no matter how much they consume. And this told us that the key to finding program participants and essentially turning audits into actual efficiency depends on or is actually finding buildings that can save the most. So we knew that we needed to understand buildings. And just for reference, that's the blue line. Here you see that as these program participants, as their monthly bill increases, well, their savings, it stays above average. So what we're looking for here are buildings. What did we do next? Well, we started looking for all the building data we could find. We started collecting data wherever we could, and there were two things that helped us in this endeavor that I think will really resonate with utilities in particular. One, there's a ton of publicly available data on buildings available. And two, and this is the kicker, most of this data is not considered personally identifiable. So utilities, you've got a lot of data. You're used to working with a lot of customer consumption records, but the problem is very personally identifiable information. It's a lot easier, it turns out, to work with building data. It's a lot more accessible. We collaborated with partners, we got grants, we spent our own R&D resources, and we got all the building data we could, and we started looking for correlations. This chart is an example of us testing out those correlations. So the red line is basically the target. That's the on-site audit output that we're trying to predict. And then the zigzaggy black and gray blue line, that's actually two lines that are layered over top of one another. And basically each line represents a different set of building features that we're trying to use to make the prediction. What you'll notice is that the lines are basically on top of one another. So what that indicates is that in this case, the data that we were trying to see if it was correlated with the end result, it wasn't. What piece of data was that? Surprisingly, it was the blower door test results from the audit. When we added in blower door test data, we found out that it wasn't actually highly correlated with the end energetic performance that was predicted by that audit. And that was a very interesting finding. Other interesting findings would be that, a full on-site audit uses about 200 data points to do its inspection. Our model needs less than 20 data points. So that's a big improvement. And the things that are correlated with energy consumption, you might guess, building size, building age, envelope characteristics, measure performance is very much driven by key equipment features. And so very interesting what you find when you start looking at that. What we wanted to do next was hone accuracy, right? So now we've got a building data set. We think the buildings are interesting to look at. We know what features are highly correlated with the end result. How accurate can we get? Let's talk through this chart because it explains it. Again, you've got your energy consumption. In this case, it's just space heating. That's what we're trying to target. Along the bottom, we've got a number of records that we're trying to target the space heating for. The red line is the on-site audit. That was the on-site audit prediction. So that's this one here. The green line is our prediction with the virtual audit. So you can see that we're matching that accuracy of the on-site audit very well, in fact, and that's really exciting. We wanted to go further and see how close we could get to actual space heating consumption. So we had some data that told us what people were actually consuming. And when we asked the model to target actual consumption instead of the output of the on-site audit, indeed, we can get closer. This is a little bit of an unfair comparison. I don't mean to say that on-site audits can't, calibrate themselves to try and predict actual consumption. Certainly they can. In most cases, on-site audits are trying to predict standard operating conditions. So, predicting actual consumption is not actually the goal. But I mentioned this to showcase that there's a lot of accuracy potential when it comes to data-based audits, when it comes to the type of virtual audits that we're describing. And I think this chart shows it really nicely. We can match on-site audits. We can even do better in some situations. So now that we know this, in the time remaining, we've got a couple minutes. I want to talk through, what are these new doors that this technology might be opening up? I think the first door that I want to talk about is market segmentation. So if I was Amazon, for example, if I was Amazon, what would I want to do? I might want to try to audit buildings and target only the top performers with special offers. So instead of slicing a service territory by demographics or by energy consumption, I might segment it instead by savings potential. We're working in the Yukon territory here in Canada to do exactly this. And it turns out that when you take a map and you start to break it up into different regions and you look at, well, who are the top performing customers in each of these regions and what measures are they using to be top performers, what you find out is that the top 25% of the population actually outperforms the average member of that population when it comes to energy savings potential by 2 to 4 times. That is a massive improvement, right? So if you know who your top performing buildings are and you target them specifically, you can actually double or quadruple your savings per customer. The other thing you might want to do, let's say you're Google or NASA, you want to look for those needles in a haystack. You might use virtual audits to look at all the potential improvement options in a customer's building and help them sort of prioritize. You might present them with a home energy report. You might present them with a virtual audit energy score. And this is something that we're working on also in Canada, essentially pre-qualifying customers into program streams they're most likely to be successful in. And in most cases, this is done before the customer even knows that the program they're pre-qualified for even exists. And one more, we'll do one more because we're really close to time here. If you're a bank, you might want to count the money. You might want to use a virtual audit to try and adjudicate and claim energy savings or eliminate risks in your program filing. Virtual audits allow us to essentially accurately predict the outcome of a program, and we can do it really quickly. As soon as we have that balance of data, we can make a prediction about what that building is actually going to do in terms of energetic performance. And this allows program managers to adjust their tactics in real time. You can shift resources, you can modify incentive values, and you can essentially change your program uptake to achieve or to hack the savings that you achieve on average per customer. So you can basically adjudicate your programs in real time. And with that, I think we'll open it up for questions. I want to leave you hopefully with the idea that data science does in fact have huge potential in energy efficiency. I hope that you agree with me that virtual audits are the new normal. And I hope you have a better understanding about what a virtual audit is, why it can really be useful or how it can be useful, how you might try to build your own, and what it can be used for.
Great. Well, thank you for that, Alex. I think it's a very complex topic, and it's kudos to you for trying to get it done in as an intro in 20 minutes. So we already have some questions coming in. So I'm going to go through the questions that people have posted. If you have a question, the best way to do it is just open up the Q&A and type it out, and that way we can keep track. If you can't do that for some reason, just raise your hand. There's a button that you can do, raise hand, and I will try to get to you. So why don't we just start straight from the top. Alex, Matthew asked us, does the virtual audit incorporate utility consumption data?
It can. So data scientists, I've never met a data scientist who doesn't want access to more data. So absolutely, if the utility has information like their utility consumption data for their customers, past program participation, the virtual audit can try and incorporate that information. The results that I sort of talked through today and presented, that was done without incorporating the consumption data. So our focus is almost entirely on the building. We believe that the building is highly predictive, that it's important enough on its own, correlated enough on its own, that you don't need consumption data to be able to make this level of prediction.
Great, thanks for that. There was one question in the chat. So just so people know, it's hard to keep track of both. If there's a chat function and a Q&A function, try and get to your question in the Q&A, but if you get in the chat, I'll try and catch it. Michael asked, where do you get the data from? You mentioned that there are some public available sources. Do you have any specifics on that?
Well, lots of places. I think, the first thing that you want to try to do, which I kind of mentioned in the presentation, is leverage the data that you already have. So for us, we're a technology company. We have a lot of users on our platforms, and we have certain rights to be able to use that data. And that's where we started. If you're a utility, you've got past program data, you want to try and leverage that data first and make use of it, assuming you can, assuming you have the rights and the licenses to be able to do that. If you don't, then you want to look to the public sector, or you want to look to other sources. Certainly, there's lots of data out there that you could buy. EnergyX, we haven't done a lot of data purchasing. We mostly get our data from publicly available sources and from partnerships like that. Government websites are one of the first places that we go to. We look a lot at what's happening in StatCan. We look a lot at what's happening with Natural Resources Canada. We use that to sort of fit prediction models to the population. You can also look to certain sites have data available about specific buildings. So a lot of times municipalities will open up sort of data about where they've issued permits for buildings. You can find data from certain social media sources. So sometimes people post about what they're doing in buildings. This is helpful if you have like a specific address that you're trying to target for whatever reason and you want to fill in other data. Sometimes you can find that people are telling you what's happening in their building. There's a whole bunch of data sources, and we're finding about new ones all the time. We had a conversation with the people at ResStock operating in the United States yesterday, and they mentioned a whole bunch of data sets that have been made available publicly where essentially homeowners have consented to allow their data to be used for modeling and for development of these things. So open source building data sources connected actually with the consumption information, I believe. So that's probably not a very satisfactory answer, but the point is there's lots. And if we talk offline, we could probably look at, what data makes sense based on what you're trying to accomplish and where you're working. But there's lots out there.
Great, thank you. Robert Greenwald asked a question that was top of my mind as well, is just the plan around commercial and the commercial building sector, and whether or not you're planning to expand, but also what additional complexities you see kind of popping up when you go to a commercial versus residential setting.
I think the big problem is that the big problem with commercial is that there's a lot of different commercial use cases. Residences are primarily used as residences. And so although there's a lot of variation in the features that make up a building and an individual energy performance, like the fundamental mechanisms that are driving that are essentially the same. When you go into businesses and commercial buildings, there's just a lot more use cases that you have to try and capture. And what that means is that the burden of data that you need to be able to make these predictions accurately, the number of correlations that you're looking for from the onset, it's increasing significantly. So I think the big challenge with doing it for commercial buildings is that you just have to work with a lot more data. We're starting to do that. We're finding success in specific areas, targeting specific types of buildings or specific use cases. But the big challenge is just that commercial buildings are used in a lot of different ways. Another challenge may be that because of that, the data sets associated with commercial buildings, there's there's a lot more variance between those data sets. That's the challenge, but it will come. Again, I'm pretty confident that we'll be able to do it soon enough.
Great. A couple people had a question just around issues of occupant health. So backdrafting due to depressurization, if air sealing is done, or adequate mechanical ventilation. And these are typically relying on blower door test results by the house. So how do you kind of take the results from a virtual audit and incorporate issues of occupant health, but occupant comfort as well?
To me, this is a great question, by the way. This is a really great question. I think to me, these are all new targets, right? So when you look at what are we trying to answer with our virtual audit, that target is really specific. We want to predict the holistic building consumption or energy consumption for that building, and then we want to do the same thing at the measured level. So if you're going to make a certain improvement, can we specify that improvement and can we predict the consumption? What the question is basically asking is, can you introduce new targets? Or what if those targets need to be qualified by some of these issues, like making sure that the home is properly pressurized, or making sure that we don't accidentally do something that's going to cause health and safety concerns later on down the road. The way that you start to deal with that is by looking for data sets that incorporate that types of information into the findings, and then training your model on that. So bringing in this occupational health and safety data into the model so that we can start to train on that. Looking at some of the nuances of making recommendations. Our model makes recommendations in part by looking at the data, but also in part by following certain rules. And those rules were set in consultation with experts. So definitely, experts always need to be involved. They need to be informing the types of decisions that models are making. And they need to also be evaluating after the fact. We need to constantly be, like I said, testing and iterating. Are the models telling us things that actually we shouldn't be doing? And certainly there's a precedence for that. If you leave a model unchecked, it can run rampant. And definitely from that perspective, virtual audits aren't a hands-off solution. They're just a new mechanism to sort of get information about buildings and get that for more and more buildings. But the same fundamental challenges of, doing retrofits and doing them properly, they still remain, absolutely.
That's good. That's a good point. There's a couple of people who have questions around accurate predictions. So Kareem asks, what data points you need for that, and David asks, how accurate can you get the predictions related to windows? David also suggests maybe the green button utility program in Ontario that's trying to improve predictions. So just your general thoughts on the accuracy of predictions, how you continually try to improve that, and what some challenges you see on that.
We feel really good about accuracy. We spend a lot of time testing and back testing the accuracy. We want to make sure that when we come up with results that they make sense at the individual level, that they make sense like at the measured level for a specific building in a specific place. Then we want to try and aggregate that and make sure that the overall trends that we're seeing fit with sort of what we would expect the population to look like. When we look at like training and testing the model, the data that we train the models on, we reserve a portion of it. And we reserve a portion of this data so that then we can test the model on that data it's never seen before. We feed it some information it's never seen before, we ask it to make a prediction, and then we compare that prediction back to the known result, right? So we're constantly doing this. And because of that, and because of the work that we've done with segmentation, making sure that, when you slice and dice the population, that the accuracy follows through, we believe that, that the accuracy is there, that the correlations are strong. And this really shouldn't be surprising because a lot of what's governing this is physics, right? So if you believe in physics, if you think that heat transfer works, then you also believe that there is sort of a fundamental underlying pattern to how buildings perform. And I think that helps to bolster the accuracy, or at least answer the question about, are we really accurate? The other thing to think about when it comes to accuracy and the building features that we're using to derive that accuracy is that you can start to compartmentalize it. You need a certain grouping of features to make a whole home prediction about energy consumption. You need other specific features to tap into what's happening with specific measures. So if we don't have any information about your heating system, we're not going to be able to make a very accurate prediction on how you can improve that heating system. We don't know what it is, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that predictions about how you can improve insulation in a part of your home are not accurate, because those predictions are based on different pieces of data. Just to give you a preview, I mentioned some of the data points that we like to use, but the most important ones would be the size of the building, the heated floor area. We want to know what type of a building it is. Is it a townhome? Is it an apartment? Is it semi-detached? We want to know the age of the building, the vintage. We want information about the building envelope, and then specific information about the equipment. Fuel sources, fuel types. It's important to know how the building is consuming energy. Is it all electricity? Is it natural gas and electricity? Are there multiple heating fuel sources? Things like that all feed in. But definitely, it's way less than, you know, a 200-point level 2 audit inspection.
How do you collect data on the envelope, the mechanicals, the air tightness? How do you do that with the virtual audit? And then concurrently, someone was asking, Olivia is asking around for their residential audits, they physically take measurements of things like insulation in the attic, or to see if there's, you know, holes or rips in the duct system so that they can provide rebates. If there's no one there to actually see those kinds of things, how do you make up for that in a virtual setting? And then even before that ends up happening, how are you kind of taking stock of the physical attributes of the building?
Right. Yeah, this is really getting into the root of, you know, the mental blocks that we have when it comes to virtual. You know, how can you believe it essentially if you don't see it? How can you know that it's true if you don't put your hands on it? The way that we actually do it at EnergyX is extremely technical. It relies on basically building models on top of models. So what I described as one model where you feed in some building data and out pops your result like magic, it's actually layers of models. And those models are looking for, you know, what data do I have? Can I use that data to try and determine missing pieces of data that might be available? The model does that largely through regression or advanced polynomial regression. It's looking for basically what it's seen in thousands and thousands of other combinations of buildings. And then ultimately, at a more general level, the same thing is happening when it's trying to actually predict the energy consumption. And how do you know that this can work? Like, how do you know that we're not glossing over things? I think there I go back to some of the non-industry examples, because these are a little bit easier for us to grasp. Does the bank catch every fraudulent transaction? Maybe not. But what they do know is that the models that they're using and the patterns that they're leveraging to identify fraud virtually give them ultimately as accurate or more accurate of a result as if they were doing a deep investigation into every potential case of fraud. And so therefore, the use case for AI in bank fraud prevention becomes the fact that you can get the same results. You can see that in the data. You can analyze it statistically, mathematically, and you can convince yourself that from a reporting standpoint, this is equivalent. Whether or not you miss some small point, I can't make that claim. But what I can say is that it's highly likely that on-site audits have the same problem. It's highly likely that within a 2 or 3 hour audit, that auditor on site, no matter how experienced, can potentially miss some things in some buildings. And so there's a certain degree of variance or, you know, error within on-site audits. And from that perspective, it's not really about being perfect. It's just about sort of, you know, matching that error. Or can virtual audits offer a relatively equivalent amount of error as on-site audits? Can they produce the same level of real deemed qualified savings? And what we've seen mathematically is that they can.
Interesting. Okay. I'm trying to bundle a few questions. Some of the questions are around kind of like the type of information you present in final or in your report back. One question was, do you calculate payback times? And then secondly, do you focus on total energy savings? So looking at both electricity and natural gas, and can virtual audits do both?
Virtual audits can do both. Well, at least ours can. We were lucky enough to have data about, you know, homes that were heated with a number of different fuel sources, and it can start to look at, you know, what happens when you layer fuel sources. So we can definitely look at it across different fuel sources. It does it does look at both the whole building consumption, and then it also tries to break down energy savings at the measure level. Again, this was possible because we started looking at anonymized audit records, right? So that's the same way that an audit does it. An audit looks at what happens in certain areas of the building, then it's also going to aggregate that performance to the entire building. And then similar to an audit, what you can do is you can run different improvement scenarios. The virtual audit makes it really easy to try different improvements out, to swap building characteristics in and out. Essentially, you're simulating how would the building respond if I modified the heating system. And then again, you can look at, well, what do we think that would do to the measure level performance, and how do we think that that's going to work in concert with other improvements that we might be specifying to impact full building performance. And although it's not necessary, if you want to go a layer further, then you can start to look at, well, how did buildings that were treated with certain retrofits actually perform? What actually happens to their energetic performance, looking at historical consumption, if that's available? You can try to go even further. You can try to go beyond sort of the standard operating conditions. So you can look at all different fuel sources. You can look at the measure level. You can look at the building level. It's really all possible, assuming that you have the data for it, and we did, and we continue to.
Okay, we have time for one more, so unfortunately we're not going to get to all of them, but this is the sign of a hot topic when you've got unanswered questions, so we'll make sure we follow up with you. One thing that I've heard a lot about is the use of AI and the use of virtual tools and you know, smarter appliances and things that can consider behavioral factors as well. So is that incorporated as well? Amira asked whether or not the virtual audit can consider these kinds of behavioral factors of the occupant.
Yeah, I think that actually the behavioral factors are sort of, if not the next frontier, I think they're one of the next frontiers, right? That's really, I think, the key to getting our predictions to match that actual consumption. That's a difficult challenge, right? That's human behavior, a huge amount of variance. People behave in unpredictable ways, and it would take a lot of data to do that. The accuracy that I showcased today, all of the analysis and the methodologies, right now, it's not using that, that like IoT data on usage and behavior. But again, I go back to that comment of, I've never met a data scientist who will say no to a new data source. And we're absolutely looking to partner with people who can provide us with this information and see if we can try to crack that problem. How can you basically not predict standard operating conditions, but how can you use occupant information or device level occupant information to try and predict actual consumption? Again, I think this is something that's going to come. If Amazon can tell when I'm out of toothpaste and they want to send me new toothpaste, then probably there's a way, at least there's hope, that we can figure out exactly how customers are using their buildings in specific situations and incorporate that information in the model to make it that much more predictive.
Great. Fantastic. So I'm going to leave it at that. Again, we do have some unanswered questions, so I'll figure out how to get those over to you, and maybe you can reach out directly. Alex did provide his email address early on. If you didn't catch it, you can get in touch with us, and we'll make sure you get connected. And just keep your eyes peeled to our website, where we'll post the recording of this and the slides as well. So I just want to thank you, Alex. Great presentation, lots of great discussion. As with every one of these, they could easily be twice as long. So I appreciate your opportunity to come and do this, but also the sticking to the time so that we can respect everyone's schedules. So next week, and knowing Natalie and how she's kind of set these up, I think she did this on purpose. So next week we have an exceptional guest speaker, Shauna Henderson, who's the CEO of Blue House Energy. She's been a veteran of the sector, doing a leader in energy audits for over 30 years. And so the session, for those that are thinking of becoming an energy advisor, you come to that session and learn from Shauna. Shauna's usually on the vanguard of a lot of these discussions, and she'll kind of explain what it takes to be part of this energy advisor scene. And we really look forward to her telling us stories about her own career and how to get more and more people into following in her great footsteps. So please join us next week and every Friday as we continue to roll out these discovery sessions. It's so great to see. We have over 100 people join this every single week, so there's some great engagement, and that's a testament to how interested and excited the scene is these days. So we're happy to bring everyone together. So thanks again. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. Enjoy the summer solstice and Father's Day for those who get to benefit from that. And we will see you all next week. Thanks very much.